slow movement of Brahms's Symphony No. 2 starts with this beautiful cello melody, and this passage is a very often asked for audition passage for cellists, as it is for these all-state and all-southern auditions. There's a lot of details to pay attention to in this excerpt, but the one overriding thing to pay attention to is just the beauty of sound and the quality of sound. I think we want a degree of density to our sound that comes from a little slow bow. For example, compared to the Tchaikovsky, the next excerpt on our list, which I think has more air in the sound, in the Brahms, let's go for a sound that has a degree of density. And we don't have to worry about making too loud of a sound. Brahms tells us poco forte, espressivo, as the dynamic. So it doesn't have to be very loud. And in fact, my attitude towards this passage is that if the tone color is good, then the dynamic will be correct. So play for tone color and don't even worry about the dynamic of your opening sound. Just pay attention to the color and quality of your sound. Now, we want to play very legato at the beginning. So coordinating the bow in a fluid way with the shift. And you'll get yourself off to a good start if you feel the tempo and take a breath to begin. You know, we start this on an up bow, so we're in the upper half, and which puts a little bit of a limitation on how much of a prep motion we can make. But even at the upper half, you know, your bow has to be on or near the string, but you can still take a breath and do this kind of prep motion with your body, which will get you off to a good start. In this measure, where we have the staccato dots under the slurs, an important goal is to have an equal length of each note, whether if it's up bow or down bow, or whether if it's the first note of the pair or the second note of the pair. Create an equality of articulation. The pickup is a smooth slur. But then in this measure, equality of articulation and not too short. Staccato dots don't necessarily mean very short, they just mean some degree of short. Make a singing, ringing kind of short note, and you do that by making sure to use enough bow. On both of those notes before the 16th thrust, make a beautiful note, beautiful color from your vibrato, and be sure to release the note ringing from your bow. And you have plenty of time for the shift during the 16th thrust, so make a beautiful ringing high note at the top of each arpeggio. And notice the high note is not the high point of the crescendo. The crescendo carries through and arrives at the E natural. That's the destination of that crescendo. And now we really are in a genuine piano dynamic. The way it's printed on this page, the piano is at the end of the line, and it's kind of easy to forget on the next lines, but just remember, the next business is in soft dynamic, and we want it to just be super smooth. I like to play that part on the D string. That is to say, once I cross to the D string, I like to stay there. I play this part in 6th position, but it's just as good to go back to the A string. If you want to go back to the A string, just make sure that your tone color between A string and D string blends nicely. That's why I like to stay on the D string, so that once I go to the D string, I stay in that same tone of voice. There's a lot of time for those shifts. Be like a singer who takes their time going up to high notes. Hey, notice in that last complete measure which I played, there's a hairpin that leads from E to F sharp, in fact goes through the F sharp. Have that crescendo go to the 3rd beat of the measure. 1, 2, arrival on 3. And while there's no hairpin in the previous measure, I suggest taking the same approach towards phrasing. Now keep sustaining. If anything, a little unprinted crescendo to go to the 3rd beat. It makes the phrase work nicely. Then you relax, do it again. And at the end of the tenor clef melody, you can take a big breath, but be sure to come off of the note ringing. And that's the end of our melody. And then we have the bass line, and this bass line is played underneath our melody at the beginning. So now it's our turn for the bass line, and another instrument has the melody. It's easy to get tangled up on the rhythm where there's the next to last measure, where the 32nd notes are, with the pickup, which remember the pickup is a B sharp from earlier in the measure. So you definitely want to think in subdivision there to play an accurate rhythm. And then be sure to use a fair amount of bow on that figure, so that you're all the way to the upper half for this long slur, so that you don't run out of bow and get jammed against the frog. So those are some ideas that I think are valuable for preparing and performing our cello audition passage from Brahms' Second Symphony. The Allegro con grazia from Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6 is another very pretty cello melody. And while, like the Brahms, it's a very pretty cello melody, it's pretty in a little different way. I think rather than the density of sound and richness of sound that we have for Brahms, here we're going to let there be a little more air in the sound. So not quite the same slow bow sound that we used for Brahms, a little more air. This movement is in 5/4 time, but it should have the same character and feel of a waltz. It's just that there's a beat missing. Right off the bat, you have a choice of fingerings. I like to do the string crossing right away, and the way I accomplish that is I use the open A for the last triplet. I like how this gives me a string crossing where I don't have any shifts to make things busy sounding. You do have the change of tone color if you take that fingering, and so that's something to strive for, to have a one tone color, even when you play on two strings. But if you want to be more homogeneous in your tone color, you could stay on the D string for the whole first two measures. And you have the same D string color for the whole two measures, but then you have to trade that off. The trade-off is the shift. But it's quite a manageable shift. So it really is a tone color choice, if you want to stay on the D string color, or if you want for simplicity to go ahead and cross. One challenge for this excerpt is that because it's in 5/4 time, our bowing is unequal. We have 2 beats down bow, and then 3 beats up bow. But we want to make sure that our sound stays equal, that there's going to be a temptation to play the 2-beat slur louder because of how that sort of balances the bow out in a way. But our much more important goal is to balance the sound out. And so for starters, don't begin this passage at the frog, because you have 2 beats down bow and 3 beats up bow, you'll get jammed. So start in the middle. And on these up bows, don't go back to the frog. You can conserve your bow so that basically you're going to use this part of your bow for this, or for at least the first phrase of this passage. And we want these skipping passages to be very cute. I think we will actually lift the bow. So lift the bow to make this articulation happen, and including to represent that 16th rest. And this is maybe the highlight of the challenges in this passage, is this big octave shift and then the staccato scale coming down. Take your time on the shift. And I think this is a time for a new finger shift. That is to say, the note that you shift from is first finger on B, and you're shifting to 3 on the B, the octave higher. Put third finger down at the beginning of the shift, so that you're shifting on third finger. And then your bow will lift off, it'll scoop off of this up bow when you arrive at the high B. And then don't use too much bow on the slur, because after that slur you want to be in the part of the bow where you can make that cheerful bouncing sound, as if laughing. This passage should sound like cheerful laughing on the cello. So lift off and also lift off the end of this next little slur. And lifting off that little slur is what starts the bouncing bow for the rest of the scale. Just like that, in a little under tempo. So to me, that's the formula for that scale. Take your time, sing on the shift on new finger, lift off, and lift off again, and then cheerful bouncing with a diminuendo as you go down the scale. And so also lift off in this section of the excerpt when you have the eighth rest. And then what follows is more of this sort of cheerful laughing. But if you draw your bow too far out, you're stuck in the wrong part of the bow, or perhaps even on the string doesn't sound as cheerful. So conserve your bow a little on the down bow. So you're at a spot on the bow where you can get that bouncing sound that makes the cheerful laughing sound. And so here it's a challenge. Tchaikovsky gives us a crescendo. At the same time, for the same reason, we don't want to be too far out. So even here with the crescendo, represent the crescendo, but conserve your bow just a little. Cheerful lifting off the articulation there. Notice the dynamics. The mezzo forte that I just passed, you don't want to play it too loudly because now it's più forte. And notice how the bowing is, so to speak, backwards here at this measure. And it just naturally works that way. That's fine. But our goal at this backwards moment is to create the same cheerful articulation that we have when it's more natural in the lower part of the bow. So crescendo. And now back to mezzo forte. Forte for the finish. So there's just that one measure where the bowing is inconvenient. But be sure to create the same articulation that you had before. So that's a very charming and elegant passage, different than a Brahms. And that's going to be a sign of your successful audition if you can make a little different character in the Tchaikovsky than you do in the Brahms based on the kind of tone color that you create. In our cello passage from Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5, we have an entirely different character. Prettiness of sound is not one of the goals here. We want to represent this rough and almost militaristic kind of character of the music, strong playing and very clear articulations. Notice that there's really not much legato, no connected singing cello playing in this passage. That quarter note B flat to the upper B flat, there's going to be some connection there. That all of these notes that have accents, they're going to have this punch. And after the punch, there's a releasing quality. It's not that the sound is stopped, it's just that there's a release of that power that made the accent. And now as we come down this passage, there are gaps between notes. After each eighth note, there's a little bit of that release. The release after the accent actually becomes a little bit of a space. So a little space after each eighth note. And then the 16th notes connect to the following eighth note. And we do want to play with a lot of power, but also we want clarity for this passage. So while it has a rough and tumble quality to it, let's not play so hard that we corrupt the sound. Rough character in clear playing. And so for the 16th note scale, just scrub it out on the string. And most days, I like to finish the scale on the D string. But this passage is so loud and so bright and so strong that if you want to just stay in first position and go to the A string, that's also quite good. It's again kind of a color choice. Maybe also a little bit of convenience choice for position work by finishing on the D string. I'm only 1/2 step away from the A flat that starts the next passage, but player's choice entirely. Say also choose a fingering so that you're not shifting in the fast notes. That is, it would be very hard to shift within the 16th notes. So always shift after the 8th note. And again, player's choice. I go to half position there. You could go to the G string already. But so always shift after the 8th note as you come down that passage. And the same qualities here, down an octave. The 16th notes connect to the next 8th note, and the 8th note has a little lift after it. And again, just scrub out the scale. Hey, notice that it's a whole step scale. Not something we find in our scale books, but so just manage it. Oh, and here again, there would be a choice. Sometimes we have to choose between a string crossing or a shift. Here I choose the shift. I choose to shift up so I can finish with a fingered note. Another option would be just to stay in first position, avoid the shift, and finish with open D. I think that's a legitimate option, but the reason I don't like it is because that way the D string rings, and everything should be kind of clamped. We're making so many short notes. I don't want the open D to ring out like that. So I prefer to make a shift, so I put a finger on it. And it's going to ring, but it has the same quality as all my other notes. In these measures where we have the quarter note and then the 16th, and it's bowed, down bow on the quarter note, and then another down bow. How much retake? That's the question to consider. And my answer is, I don't do any retake. I just use kind of a condensed down bow for the E, and then I just stay there. to scrub out those 16th notes on the string very strongly in the middle of the bow. You know, now I'm too far out though. And so for the second down, down moment, I do some retake just to get back to that scrubbing part of my down bow. And then very severe articulation for these dotted rhythms. But that, just going back a measure and repeating that point, that's an important idea to have control over how much retake you're going to do. You could, if you wanted to use more down bow for the quarter, because you prefer that sound, then you have to do a retake, of course. A legit option. Some conductors might even ask for that. I'll tell you why I prefer, another reason I prefer that is that it makes a smaller gap. I don't think there should be such a big gap after the quarter note. That's why I don't do a big retake. Let's see. So I do no retake after the first quarter note in the measure. After the second quarter note in the measure, I do just enough retake to get back to my scrubbing spot on the bow. And you know, at this moment, after we play the high A sharp, just the way I think it's the way the music is spaced on the page, there's a fair amount of white paper in between the notes there, and it's easy to make that convert into time. But there's no extra beat there. We have to go on strictly in tempo. So that high A sharp is the third beat, and then the 16th note is the pickup to the fourth beat. And again, very severe articulation on these dotted rhythms. So that bottom line is just strong, broad bow strokes, sustain the dotted half notes. And there again, the accents have like a punch and release quality. Not actually a gap between the notes, just accent and release that accented power just a little. So those are some thoughts on Shostakovich, how to make it powerful and clear, and how it's very different than the Brahms and Tchaikovsky excerpts. I hope those ideas are helpful. Have a great audition.